So what could you do with $1 trillion? It's a fun thought experiment, right? Well, the US government is about to spend nearly 14 times that on, well, basically nothing. Not on new roads, not on better schools, not even on defense. We're talking about just paying interest. Today, we're going to break down America's absolutely massive trillion-dollar bill and unpack the demographic time bomb that's ticking away right underneath it all.
Okay, so when people talk about the US budget, you always hear about the national debt, right? But the debt itself, as huge as it is, isn't the immediate story. The real problem, the thing that's squeezing everything else, is the cost of carrying that debt. It's kind of like the minimum payment on your credit card, and that minimum payment is about to go through the roof.
Get ready for this number, $13.8 trillion. Just let that sink in for a second. According to the Peterson Foundation, that's what the U.S. is projected to spend over just the next 10 years on interest alone. To give you some perspective, that's more than the entire yearly economic output of China. It's a number so staggering, it's going to dictate how America can spend its money for a whole generation.
And just to be super clear, this isn't money going towards building new things. It's not for shiny new infrastructure or groundbreaking research or even national security. Nope. This is basically the financial version of running on a hamster wheel. It's the interest on a national credit card that's been maxed out for a long, long time, and that minimum payment is just climbing and climbing.
Now, check out the path on this chart from the Peterson Foundation. See that? It's not a gentle slope, it's a cliff. We're on a trajectory to go from paying around $650 billion a year in interest to over $1 trillion by 2029. And it doesn't stop there. By 2035, that number could balloon to almost $1.7 trillion. Think about that. That's more than the entire U.S. defense budget spent every single year just to cover interest payments. Wow.
So how in the world did we get here? What's fueling this massive fire? How did these interest payments get so out of control? Well, it wasn't just one bad year of spending. The real answer is a deep structural issue that's been building for decades. You could call it the great mismatch between what America spends and what it actually brings in.
So where does all this debt actually come from? It's pretty simple, actually, but it's a persistent problem. It's a structural mismatch between what the government spends and what it collects in taxes and other revenue. Year in and year out, the country spends more than it takes in. And that difference? Well, it gets covered by borrowing more money.
And this chart here, based on CBO data, really paints a clear picture. It shows that a huge chunk of all federal spending isn't paid for by taxes or other income. It's financed by borrowing. We're essentially putting a significant piece of our government's operations on a credit card, and that's exactly what creates this constantly growing pile of national debt.
Okay, so what is the single biggest driver pushing spending so much higher than our income? Now, a lot of people might guess it's military spending or maybe foreign aid, but the answer is actually something way more powerful and a lot harder to control. Simply put, America is getting older. The real heart of the issue is something called a demographic transition. It's a major shift that's happening right now, not just in the US, but across most of the developed world. What does that mean? Well, on average, people are having fewer kids, and at the same time, we're living longer. And that 1-2 punch is totally reshaping the country's age profile.
And this chart from the Brookings Institution shows you just how fast this change is unfolding. Just a decade ago, about 1 in every 8 Americans was over 65. Today, it's closer to 1 in 7. And in just 20 years, it's projected to be 1 in 5. Just think about that. A full 20% of the entire population will be retirement age. That puts an unbelievable amount of pressure on programs like Social Security and Medicare, which, by the way, are the biggest items in the federal budget.
And this slide right here really gets to the mathematical core of the challenge. See, systems like Social Security and Medicare are pay-as-you-go. That means today's workers are paying for today's retirees. But as you can see, that fundamental ratio is shifting and fast. Back in 2017, you had 3.7 workers for every 1 retiree. By 2047, that number is expected to drop to just 2.6. That's a recipe for a system under some serious, serious stress. And it's really important to get this. These aren't just wild guesses or political talking points. This data comes from some really rigorous, nonpartisan analysis by places like the Hutchins Center at Brookings. They're not just mapping out the problem, they're also laying out the incredibly tough choices that are waiting for us down the road. Okay, so let's recap. We've got a massive interest bill. That bill is being driven by a deep structural deficit, and that deficit is being fueled by an aging population. These are powerful trends that are pretty much locked in. So the real question becomes, what on earth can be done about it? What does the path forward even look like?
Because of this huge demographic shift, there are no easy answers here. There's no magic bullet. We can't just trim a little bit from the budget here and there and call it a day. Solving this is going to mean pulling some really big, really difficult levers. Levers that touch on some of the most sensitive parts of American life and policy. Most economists will point to four main options, and trust me, none of them are popular. First, you could adjust those big entitlement programs, which could mean changing how benefits are calculated or who's eligible. Second, you could adjust tax policies to bring in more revenue, but the big fight is always over who pays more. Third, you could delay the retirement age, basically asking people to work longer. And fourth, you could find ways to grow the workforce, maybe through something like immigration reform. As you can imagine, every single one of those options comes with its own set of incredibly difficult political and social trade-offs.
And all of this brings us to the final, unavoidable question you see here. As America gets older, how is it going to choose to balance its books? This isn't really a Republican or a Democrat issue. At its very core, it's a math problem. The demographic numbers are crystal clear, and frankly, they're unforgiving. The only thing that's still up in the air is whether there's the political will to actually solve it. The choices that are made in the next few years will absolutely define America's economic reality for generations to come.